I met my wife a few years back at a hospital when visiting a friend's wife who had recently given birth. She arrived at the same time, but because my friend's wife was sleeping, we had to wait in the lobby for approximately 40 minutes to an hour until she awoke. People who know me well know that I am highly extroverted and often talk to strangers while waiting. I tried to crack jokes with the nurses at the front counter, but they weren't having it, so I returned to sit with my wife. I attempted to keep my mouth shut, but we could tell the stillness was uncomfortable. And the instant I started talking, we both busted out laughing. I had no idea she had been monitoring me. She knew I was going to try to talk to her from there. We spoke for over an hour before a nurse came to inform us. My friend's wife was awake, so we both walked in to see her and their infant girl. As much as I'd like to mention my wife's name so that others can keep away from her, I'd like to remain anonymous in case any of her friends come across this account before we leave the hospital that day. I received my wife's number, and we began conversing. I also followed her on Facebook, where we communicated all the time. She was stunning, and I adored practically everything about her. When we met, she was working at a veterinary clinic, and I was employed by a construction company. We hung out anytime we were free because we were both unmarried, and we gradually got fond of each other. One of the reasons I adored my wife was that she was constantly looking for new ways to improve herself. She frequently rented self-help books and listened to personal development podcasts, among other things. She also helped me develop the habit of reading books and striving to improve, which made me grateful to have a companion who cared about my development. Fast ahead a few months. We were quite close, and we always told each other about what happened at work. Even if I don't meet my colleagues at work, she was familiar with their names, roles, and everything that occurred during the work day. This was also true for me. I knew everyone's name at the vet clinic where she worked, including the names of the animals that came in every day and those who returned. I knew she was the one for me at that time, so I asked her out when she said yes. I invited her to move in with me so that we could start planning our lives and futures together, and she did. She moved in with me, and we became such a great relationship that I would do anything for her. In fact, I did not allow her to contribute to the rent since I believed it was my obligation to care for her. I bought her whatever she wanted, and we went on numerous lavish dates together before I met my wife. I'd been in 3 other relationships, but they all cheated on me, and none of them cared about me as much as my wife did. So I thought she was the one for me. After less than 3 months of dating, I met her family. She also met mine. Our families knew we were dating, and we were serious about it. So after 10 months of dating and living together, I asked her to marry me, and she agreed before we got married. We both agreed we would have children. After 3 years of marriage, we could spend time together, do the things we enjoyed, and not have to put our lives on wait. Most significantly, we would have saved enough money for our children to live comfortably. Not even a year had passed since our wedding. Everything had changed, and everything remained as beautiful and happy as it had been while we were dating. However, things began to shift between us after we celebrated our 2nd-year anniversary. My wife began to lose interest in the things she once enjoyed, including our 2nd anniversary, which she used to look forward to. That's when I started to suspect there was something wrong. It all started with her fixation with personal development, and she claimed to have discovered a new mentor online, a man in his late 30s who she asked to mentor her for money, and he agreed. According to my wife, this man was a life coach who had previously mentored and helped others construct their lives. At first, I had no objections to her having a mentor, since I knew she would not back down or change her mind until she achieved what she wanted. So I let her do her thing. However, a few weeks after she began her mentorship sessions with him, I observed they were becoming increasingly close, and I had the impression that something was awry between them, but I shook it off. It wasn't enough that I was paying for the mentorship on an hourly basis. She was always making up new excuses for me to pay for stuff I didn't understand. She met with her mentor practically every week and had to cancel the majority of her lunch appointments to be with him. As if that wasn't enough, once I got home from work, I had to eat my supper, watch TV, and go to bed alone. since she would chat to him on the phone for hours without spending time with me. I complained, but she felt I was overreacting, so I let it go. I expected her to change, but things just grew worse. We were supposed to travel to my parents' house to celebrate my father's 62nd birthday, but she did not show up and refused to return my calls that evening. When I went home, I saw her and her mentor eating supper in her home, and I was furious when she noticed me. She smiled and seemed like everything was okay. It made me even angrier when I discovered she had forgotten about her evil's birthday, despite my reminder that morning. The oddest aspect was that we hadn't eaten supper together in weeks, and she had even stopped cooking. But there she was, eating and smiling alongside her guru. I got angry and yelled at her. I then asked her mentor to leave, but she got up and began challenging me in front of her mentor. I explained that he had taught her a lot of things and couldn't leave, so I had to pick between joining them for dinner and doing something else. I was so furious that I left the house and returned to my parents' place that night. I kept close to my phone in the hopes that she would call and beg me, but she did not. That's when I had to hunt up her mentor online. To my amazement, I spent hours researching him and found nothing regarding mentorship or personal development. When I became upset with my lack of results, I hired a private investigator to look into him. Weeks after digging the pie, I realized he was a convicted felon and a master manipulator with outstanding warrants. I couldn't believe it. The private eye could not locate anything about mentorship with him. That's when I discovered my wife had been manipulating me for months. She was taking money from me and giving it to her lover as payment, while I worked my ass off to offer her a better life. I obtained all of the proof from my PI. I paid him off. The next day I left early to meet my wife at home and show her all the proof. But I caught them in the act on my couch and I was furious. I addressed him before throwing the evidence on the table, and my wife seemed unsurprised. It implied that she knew everything about him. She then begged pardon and urged me not to say anything. But I told them I had phoned the police and she might marry her lover and rot in jail. For all I cared. While I was raging at them, police arrived at my house and took him away right after. He was taken away. She dropped on her knees and began to beg me. She claimed he twisted her, but now that he was gone, we could return to what we were. Hearing that made me even angrier. So I kicked her out and called her parents to inform them that their daughter would be returning home soon. And we weren't together anymore. Months later, we divorced and parted ways until the last 6 months. She kept phoning me from numerous numbers until I told her that we could never be together, even in her future life. Of course I miss her, but being single is more preferable to living with an unfaithful husband. Even though the final few months of our marriage were horrible for me, I'm glad I made the correct decision. I'm curious why you didn't search up your wife's mentor before she started her mentorship classes. That was irresponsible on your part. It's bad that she duped you into paying for classes that didn't exist. Although it was difficult, you took the correct decision by pushing her out of your home and divorcing her. Such a lady does not deserve second chances because even if you forgive her, she will cheat on you again. Even more frightening, she displayed no remorse when you presented her the facts. Most significantly, she is no longer present in your life. Thank you for telling us story 2. My wife and I separated after 2 years of marriage. We began dating around 2020 after the coronavirus pandemic hit the world. She lost her entire family of 3 to the virus and is her closest family friend. I had no choice but to take her in because I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. One was my bedroom and the other was my office, as I was already working remotely for a top freelancing platform whose name I would not reveal. I had to move my office into my bedroom so she could sleep in the second room when she moved in. She was weeping, often grumpy and almost despondent. I accepted the obligation of caring for her at the moment. I was doing well financially, so I didn't need her to give anything, not even groceries. She ate little and was not herself for the first few months. 0.7 months later, she recovered from her sadness and resumed her normal activities. She began seeking for work primarily because she wanted to repay me for everything I had done for her. But when I found out, I told her to stop working and advised she learn a high-demand talent so she could register on the same platform. I worked and earned money remotely. She agreed. So I paid for an expensive course for her. She acquired the technique and enrolled on the platform in the months that followed, eventually gaining her own clients. This is how we came to be remote workers living together. My wife moved in with me after losing her parents. I'd just broken up with a bad relationship, and the last thing I wanted was another connection. However, having my wife in the house all the time benefited me in some way and forced me to reconsider the important things in life. I developed feelings for her when she was living with me. Even if you don't know, our friendship grew stronger and tighter as she became more active again. I became her only friend and family. Slowly, we began doing things that only couples do. We went on holidays together because we were both financially solid, gave each other gifts, visited locations we had always wanted to go, and even took more advanced courses to improve our talents. After 2 years of living together, the neighbors and others who remained or worked around our house were aware of our relationship. Even though I hadn't officially asked her out, I knew she loved me. But I was terrified she'd say no, since she kept saying she was tired of people coming into her life and leaving when she needed them the most. So I continued procrastinating. I eventually asked her out for her 27th birthday. We didn't do anything fancy that year. We headed to the restaurant for a lavish meal. I bribed the waiter to bring in a cake I had delivered several hours before we arrived. Instead of happy birthday, you wrote, "Will you be my girlfriend?" She enthusiastically agreed. Initially, I planned to propose to her, but I wanted to properly ask her out. Last point, 4 months after she said yes to me. I asked her to marry me and she agreed. My parents already knew her because her late family and my family were friends, and they were overjoyed when they learned we were marrying. We made wedding plans and held a little wedding. Then we moved into a larger apartment with adequate room for our different workspaces when we moved into our new flat. My wife was always upbeat and friendly with the neighbors. The neighbors were open and kind, like my prior neighbors, who were always busy and rarely had time to speak or converse with us for longer than 5 minutes. This made me glad because she experienced a different kind of bliss, spending time with the neighbors, especially because she had lost her family and hardly interacted with anyone other than my family and me. She even began preparing and sharing food with the neighbors and their children, which added to their bond. Working remotely has given us the freedom to set our own work hours whenever she finished working. She would go grocery shopping and return home to cook. She claimed that cooking allowed her to clear her thoughts and that eating meals with others reminded her of family gatherings, among other things. I understood her point of view, so I did not dispute with her or attempt to stop her. Even when some of the neighbors began to take advantage of her good gestures, aside from the food, some began to request cash aid, which we provided whenever possible. There was also an 80-year-old man who requested if she could help him cook in the evenings and clean his house because he did not have any family living with him. When my wife told me about it, I reluctantly consented, and she would cook and clean at his place 2 or 3 times every week. About a month after she began cooking and cleaning for him, I observed she went there practically every evening except for weekends. This occurred more frequently than their initial agreement, but I assumed everything was fine. One day as I was watching TV in my flat, I heard a knock on the door. I knew it was unusual for my wife to knock while she had her keys, so I opened the door and saw she was cooking for our neighbor. When I saw him, I assumed he had come to thank us for her assistance, but he appeared disturbed. When he sat down, I asked him whether everything was fine. At first, he stated, "Son, I want your wife to stop coming over to my house because she is having an affair with my tenant." Then he paused and looked at me. It startled me and left me speechless. I inquired if he was telling the truth, and he said he had no reason to lie. During our conversation at my apartment, my wife had gone grocery shopping to cook a meal for the next day, so she was not home. I didn't want to trust the elderly man, but as he explained, he had no incentive to lie, and it made no sense for him to lie about my wife. Finally, I asked him if he could show me something to verify he was telling the truth, and he agreed to record a video and give it to me. She went to his house for the last time that evening when my wife returned home. I did not mention anything to her, I just pretended everything was fine and didn't mention that the old man had came over while she was away. The next evening, she told me she was heading there as usual, and I pretended I wasn't paying attention and was preoccupied with my job. About 15 minutes after she left, the old man texted me a video of my wife in his rental room, and they were making out in the living room, while I assumed he was sleeping in his room. I was devastated. I recognized the man she was kissing, and I couldn't believe she'd done that to me. I thanked the old man and informed him that I would be locking her out of the house, and he pledged to do the same because his rent was overdue and he'd had enough of him. Later that evening, when my wife arrived home and was unable to enter the house, she began yelling and hitting the door. I sent her the same video, and she started begging me from outside. She wanted me to open the door to talk about things, but I was done with her. She had betrayed me and had no regard for my sentiments, not at the other end. The old guy kicked out her lover, leaving them both homeless that evening. I refused to let her in that night, and she returned a few days later to discover her belongings piled in one corner of the house. However, she refused to leave. So I contacted the cops, and she was disrupting both my and my neighbor's peace. She was taken away, and 2 months later I divorced her. She cried angrily and attempted to emotionally blackmail me into remaining with her, but I'd had enough with her crap. She mentioned that I was the only person she had left in the world, but I reminded her that she already had a lover. I severed all relations with her. It turns out that her partner was an illegal immigrant who fled the country. When I threatened to have him jailed on the day my wife arrived to collect her belongings, in the end he abandoned her and she had nowhere else to turn. It's been a few months, and I still feel stupid for being treated that way, but I'm much better. Now, I do not think I'll be ready for a relationship anytime soon. You've had awful relationships in the past, and they took your affection for granted. You should even be grateful that your wife finally revealed her true colors early in the marriage and did not lead you on for years. It would have been more upsetting over time. Consider yourself fortunate to have a good neighbor who could not witness your wife cheating on you. I know you did a lot for her, but this isn't your responsibility. I am delighted you made the correct decision. I wish you all the best moving ahead. Story 3. My girlfriend and I were together for 5 years and lived together the entire time. She needed somewhere to stay when we met, so she moved in as my roommate for a couple of days. But then we fell asleep together, and our relationship started. We both enjoyed going for walks, hosting friends for board games, and working at a local stable that provided therapeutic riding. We spent a lot of time there, working together at least once a week. We led our basset hound along our memorized hiking track through the valley and over the mountains. Over time, we developed a tight bond and enjoyed living together. I was relieved that initiating a romance with my roommate had not come back to bother me, but I hadn't considered the prospect of change at the time. I had the impression that we could stay this way indefinitely. She became restless, despite the fact that her head appeared to be in the clouds when she mentioned renting a vehicle and moving across nation. We didn't have the money to do so without depleting our hard-earned savings. And if we didn't go to work, we'd fall behind on our expenses. When I told her this, she proposed that we sublet our apartment. She wouldn't let go of the concept even if I disliked it. I didn't trust a stranger to stay in our home, keep it clean, pay us, and depart when we returned. It seemed like something was going to go wrong. Unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had scheduled to meet with a potential tenant. She had met him without me for who knows how long while I was at work. She informed me they met alone in the apartment. I was infuriated. I told her she was lucky he didn't try anything while I was not present. How stupid would you have to be to meet a stranger in your home without your spouse present? She swore nothing unusual or awful had happened, and he appeared to be a respectable, honest man. He actually worked in the same building as her. I couldn't believe it, but I agreed to go with my girlfriend. She desperately wanted us to buy a van and go on a journey. It seemed like her life relied on it. Not so. I left work early one day and purchased a van for us. I sent her flowers and a card that essentially suggested she could tell the tenant to move in. I'd love nothing more than to travel with her. As I drove through the parking lot, I noticed her exiting the rental office with a man who I believed was the sublet. They smiled from ear to ear before kissing passionately. I had to yank the wheel to avoid hitting a parked automobile. This was supposed to be our sublet, but I just saw my girlfriend kissing him. I had not even told her I was prepared to do this. She just did it anyway. I was furious and shivering when I got out of the van, carrying the flowers and card carelessly. My girlfriend observed me, and her expression changed from glad and happy to afraid. She hurried up to me and asked if this was our new van. One look at AP, the guy she was kissing, gave me the impression that he thought too highly of himself, had a lot of money, and didn't care that he was kissing my girlfriend and intruding on my life. I told her it was my new van because I had just noticed her kissing our tenant. AP gave us room as she attempted to downplay what I had just witnessed. I told her there was no reason then, threw the flowers and card at her. She snatched it up, began reading it, and suddenly sobbed. It was as if the card, the van, and my presence in front of her shocked her out of whatever fantasy she was feeding herself. She claimed to have no idea what had happened to her. She only wanted to travel with me and make the sublet her official. I criticized her for sounding like an idiot, claiming that was all she wanted. She met him alone in our apartment twice, and I captured them kissing in so many words, I dumped her. We argued back and forth while JP sat in his car, but I don't recall what we discussed. I recall how betrayed I felt. My girlfriend became wise to me when she understood I would not forgive her for this. She claimed she didn't have to go because her name was on the lease, but she'd allow me some room to process what had happened. I saw her get into a car and go. I went into the flat in a zombie-like stupor and felt as if it belonged to someone else. I didn't want to be here anymore, and I couldn't be with my girlfriend when she justified herself for meeting another man. I looked at the van I had recently purchased and decided what I was going to do. I packed everything into the van. I separated it into basics to sell and items to retain. I placed my apartment key under the mat. I took my basset hound to the van and left Point 2 weeks later. I remembered my ex mentioning that AP worked in the same building as her. It wasn't difficult to locate the information I wanted and send an email to my ex's boss. She responded less than a week later, thanking me for bringing this breach of corporate rules to her attention. AP and my ex were fired for dating on the job. She tried calling and texting me pitiful cheater remarks, but I knew she was simply one of the many people I was meant to meet. She wasn't even angry with me for getting her fired. She only wanted me to return home just as much as her betrayal stung. She was the one who persuaded me to get the van and travel. I hope that everybody who reads my tale does not let anyone or anything stop them from being happy or pleased with their lives. OP. It appears that your girlfriend initiated the whole thing because she was restless and clearly going through something. But she never attempted to communicate to you about the source of her difficulties. Perhaps you could have had the opportunity to rebuild the relationship if she had shown some self-control, respect, and patience until you got on the road. As awful as it was, she demonstrated that she was unable to control herself or be the woman you expected her to be. Talking things out could have saved this relationship. However, it requires two mature people to do so. Starting a secret relationship to alleviate your feelings is not the way to settle problems. The finest thing someone can do is communicate honestly with their spouse, the person they should rely on more than anyone else. I wish you all the best and hope you recover from this experience. My wife, 35, and I, 38, were married for 3 years. Our parents had a significant influence on our marriage. Her parents were yearning for grandchildren, but given that she was their only child and had never had a long-term relationship, they took matters into their own hands. They knew my parents from church, and they were growing impatient with me. I hadn't had a partner in over a year and never imagined having children with anyone. My folks were growing old. My future in-laws approached them while they were watching the clock tick. The four of them set up a blind date for us. She had a big build, but I'm not one to judge just on appearances. It was evident that she lacked self-confidence and did not expect to marry. On our first date, she was brutally honest and made no attempt to conceal her identity. I admired her for that. She actually held many of the same thoughts and values as mine. I began to wonder if she was all we needed to go through life. I asked her what she would like to do if we started seeing each other. She stated she liked painting, so it became her pastime. Only a month later, our parents planned our wedding. Our connection was not horrible, but I didn't really know her. So I suppose I should have stopped it. I only wanted to make everyone else happy. I made it a personal aim to boost my wife's confidence and improve our lives together. I wasn't in shape either, so I thought it would be fantastic for us to start some active interest together. We got bikes, but she only joined me for a few rides before making excuses. Every time she spoke it, her knees hurt. We started walking around our neighborhood, but she got sunburned once and stopped going outside on sunny days. 3 years later, we remained together. I could tell we had both changed in positive ways, although I admit I could only spend a few hours with her before feeling strange. She made me feel as if what I said was a waste of time, and whatever I recommended we do together was pointless. When she told me she was going to a yoga class, I was skeptical. She stated it was the best method for her to get in shape. I asked if I could do it with her, and she paused before declining. She wanted this to be her opportunity to reflect and improve on herself. That I had arranged for a friend of mine to wait in our area until my wife left so he could follow her. He called me when they got to the cafe. My wife was meeting a man for coffee. From what he could tell, this appeared to be their first date. I felt nauseated. What I had been concerned about for so long was finally becoming a reality. The entire marriage was a poor idea. I chose not to approach her that night, but my friend texted me a photo of them sitting at a table. I just plugged in my phone and fell asleep. 4 days later, I told my wife I was going to work at the same time as her yoga class. But instead, I parked down the street and got into my friend's car. We followed her from a distance till she arrived at the bowling alley. She greeted AP with a kiss on the lips. I was surprised to see her in this manner. She was wearing a flirtatious outfit, and I could tell she had gained confidence since our initial meeting, probably due to my emotional support and love. However, she was utilizing her newfound confidence to kiss and date another Emma, and not my pal. I jumped out of the car and confronted them. She stopped kissing him and turned to face me. She began hyperventilating and became defensive after accusing me of following her. I believe she was just terribly sorry and humiliated. I believe our marriage meant more to her than she wanted to accept, since it would have made the moment excruciatingly agonizing. I basically told her she was cheating on me, and we were done. It sounded weird since I couldn't think clearly. She went inside with AP and waited in line to get bowling shoes. She was attempting to make it appear as if nothing had happened. That's when I became enraged. I trusted her and accepted her as my wife despite my fears. I have my heart broken, and now she was pretending she had done nothing wrong. My companion and I started a game in the bowling lane next to theirs. I made it very awkward for them by looking while they bowled like morons. I couldn't determine what to do, so I did what came to mind. I ordered nachos and tossed them at my ex's head. She cried and moaned, and the bowlers around us were quite entertained. AP informed my nacho-covered ex that he was going to see other people and left. It was really satisfying to follow my friend out of there without worrying about my ex getting the cheese out of her head. I filed for divorce, which was a nightmare for our parents. I felt worse for them than for myself, but I was relieved we did not have children together. She attempted to call and speak with me in person, despite the fact that she expressed highly intimate and honest things, such as crediting me for her maturity and growth. It did not matter to me. She still needed to mature after cheating on me. I did everything I could for her, but I also wanted to meet someone else. It has been years since this occurred, and I am pleased to report that I am married and have children with my new wife. My parents are happy grandparents, and I am proud of my wife. She only started seeing and kissing another man because she was selfish. She did not think about how you would feel or the fact that you were her husband. You were the one who encouraged her and helped her develop self-care impotence. When she became bored with the relationship, she looked for someone to cheat on you with instead of telling you how she felt. I am glad to hear you have had children with your new wife and your parents are pleased. Here is the next story. When I parked into the back stairwell of a parking lot, the first thing I noticed was how rundown everything appeared. I was familiar with this location because my workplace was only a few blocks away. But I had not been back in the old neighborhood in years, and a lot had changed. The building I was currently approaching had been transformed from a house where a family with children and most likely a dog lived into a cozy neighborhood bar by the end of world. At the time, it was a charming spot where neighbors would gather after work for a beer and wives would meet their husbands for a relaxing evening together. The good old days were long gone. Today, Back Stereo was in the poorest district of Cleveland's most oppressive suburb. There were more rundown buildings around it than residential ones, and the majority of them were covered in crude graffiti by local gangs. Abandoned cars near boarded-up storefronts, some of which served as shelters for people, littered the nearby streets and intersections with their metal skeletons. This was the part of the city that the city fathers had long forgotten. I simply lowered my cap slightly on my forehead and entered the atmosphere of the old rundown bar, which assaulted all of my senses at once. The first attack came from the smell, which was disgustingly sharp and reminiscent of beer and urine. This is not the most appealing way to introduce the establishment of visitors. The second blow was aimed at my eyes. Except for one corner, which was illuminated by a bright light from some obscure mini-dash projector, the entire place was pitch black. A rather unattractive woman was slowly swaying, attempting some sort of dance on a table next to the bar while lowering her head. She rocked back and forth in time with the music playing on an old jukebox nearby. One of these top classic hits blaring from the speakers made my skin vibrate with each bass note absorbed by the dusty air. I knew that staying here for too long with such deafening noise would deafen me, but I intended to do only what I came for and leave as soon as possible. Once my eyes adjusted to the contrast between the illumination and its absence, I approached the bar counter, found a stool whose seat wasn't torn or sticky, and settled onto a bar. Minka, at the other end of the counter, was cleaning up the mess left by the swaying man, who seemed to be barely holding on, trying not to test the strength of the old, polished wood in front of him with his forehead. After finishing, she turned to toss the rag into the sink and wash her hands under the tap stream. I just sat in my seat waiting for her to notice me. I hadn't seen her for over 4 years. She had changed significantly over this long period, but I would recognize her anywhere. Remarkably, for many years I'd been keeping track of her and the events in her life, and she hadn't noticed me even once, wondering if she would recognize me. I hope she wouldn't. At that moment, she had her back to me. Her jeans, tucked into cowboy boots, clung to her hips much more than I remembered, and an unsightly layer of fat protruded over the top and hung over the tightened belt at her waist. She was dressed in a faded white t-shirt with the letters Baxter's on the back. That silver-gray curls that found her hairstyle fell to the middle of her back, gathered in a messy ponytail. It seemed like she hadn't used a brush or comb for a long time. From my bar stool, I could discern a collection of tattoos inked on her arms and neck, and I knew that besides these, there were others hidden from view in various places. Her face looked tired and grim. Her nose was crooked in an uneven scar above one. I told the story of her challenging past. She didn't use cosmetics as if that could somehow improve her appearance, and it seemed like a perpetual smirk had frozen on her lips. Overall, this bartender resembled a hardened hag, the kind you wouldn't want to meet alone in a dark alley. Her name was soon wiping her hands. She took a sip of alcohol from the glass by the sink, shaking her hair to give it some semblance of order. She turned and surveyed her domain. It was then that she noticed a new customer. Me, as she approached the deafening music from the jukebox, finally stopped in. The dancer descended from the table. "I'll be back in an hour," the worn-out stripper exclaimed, not even attempting to conceal her sagging breasts, swaying in different directions as she passed us. "Okay," came the laconic response from the other side of the counter. The bartender stopped in front of me and asked, "What can I give you a beer?" I said, placing a $5 bill on the counter. She walked to the fridge and pulled out my beer, using it with a well-practiced click and placing the bottle in front of me. She took the money, pausing to give me another scrutinizing look. She returned to the sink to wash the accumulated dirty glasses. I couldn't tell if she recognized me, probably not. After all, a lot of time had passed, and as much as she had changed, I had changed just as much. Damn, back then my head was adorned with a bunch of wavy white hair, and now there's more smooth skin than hair on my skull, which is why I always wear a baseball cap. The guy at the other end of the bar finally got what he wanted, and his head met the well-worn wood, causing his limp body to collapse onto the sticky floor. "Damn it!" came an irritated exclamation from the sink. "Elroy, why do you always treat me like this?" She stood there, wiping her hands again, and surveyed the room with disgust. "Can anyone help me drag this drunk to his car?" "How about you?" she asked, leaving the rag in my direction. "All right," I replied evenly, placing my beer on the counter. The two of us had to lift, pull, drag, and then shove, bend, and stop this extremely drunk guy from the floor, where he collapsed like a sack to a somewhat sitting position behind the wheel of his car as we were heading back to the bar. The drunk guy's car unexpectedly roared to life behind us, screeched, and sped down the street. However, we didn't hear the expected crash, so we just shrugged and continued our way. "Back, thanks," said the bartender, placing another beer in front of me. This clown puts on the same show about once a week. One day he'll stop coming here when he crashes into something and shatters his drunken behind. For the second time since I walked in, she scrutinized me from head to toe. I couldn't read her thoughts, but I was curious if she would recognize me. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Nothing special," she drawled. "You just look familiar, that's all. Are you from around here?" "I'm from Texas. I'm just passing through." Happened to walk by and decided to drop in, sliding me the same skeptical look. She returned to the sink, picked up the abandoned glass, and took another sip. Now that I could see better in the darkness, I surveyed the room again and noticed that I was the only patron left in the bar. Glancing around, I heard the clink of the glass being placed on the counter, and she muttered shit. Her head sharply turned in my direction, and she stared at me with a mixed expression of recognition and disdain. "Ray, you is a son of a bitch." She is incredulously approaching and standing in front of me, hands on her fake hips. "Pinch, my eyes. But how is this possible? You're supposed to be dead. I shot you 40 years ago." Whoops, there's the black cat suddenly out of the bag. "Well, actually, soon you didn't kill me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here now." I took a sip from my bottle and placed it on the counter. "Yes, everyone thought you did, but that's not the case. That's why you've been locked up in Marysville State Prison for women for the past 38 years. For something you only thought about doing. I hope you had a pleasant time there." I grinned slyly. "Go to hell, you son of a bitch," she growled, burning me through with her gaze. "You're repeating yourself. You've already called me a son of a bitch, maybe for a variety. You could try using some colorful expressions you learn from other killers and prostitute, the ones you shared cells with. Well, dear, let me see the real you, the tough and straight little bitch you've become. Show me the broken bitch from Self. See that in the tense silence?" I defiantly took another sip of my beer, tilting the bottle slightly in my hand. I gestured with the neck toward the bewildered Sue. "What's happening over there with you? It seems I notice a property of advantage tattoo on your neck. Come on." She must have imparted more than just son of a bitch to you. I'm aware of those nights you spent with your head buried between her thick thighs, engaging intimately every time she passed gas. You must have experienced quite a lot. I'm also familiar with those occasions when she traded you to other groups for cigarettes. I've noticed the tattoos along your arms that tell the tale. They transferred you from cell to cell, putting you in compromising situations while you interacted with various individuals. Must have been quite an ordeal. Soon shock, pain, and hatred flared in her glazed eyes, drilling into me. I even know about the child you gave birth to by that huge black guard. What was his name? Malcolm, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That little black baby you had to give away to Child Protective Services. So, as you can see, I know everything about you from the very day you shot me in the head." She stood there on the other side of the bar counter, staring at me with wide-open eyes, frozen in place like a marble statue. I just gave her a faint smile, leaned my elbows on the counter, and resting my chin on interlocked fingers, watched her reaction critically for a long while, standing and sitting across from each other. We stared into each other's eyes. Neither of us moved or averted our gaze. She blinked first when she turned and took a few uncertain steps to pour herself another drink, this time a larger one. I took the opportunity and leisurely lifted my bottle as well, Sue, and stood by the sink, placing both hands on the countertop on either side of her and slightly turning. Her head glanced askance at the reflection of me hanging in the mirror before her. She didn't utter a word, but I could almost hear the rustle of thoughts swirling in her mind. She took another big sip from her glass, exhaled, and turned towards me. "So what the hell are you doing here?" I smiled and took another sip. "I just wanted to see how you're doing. Maybe we could reminisce about old times. Indulging memories of the past." Her face changed when she lowered her gaze to the floor. The stern expression softened, shoulders slumped, and she somehow shrank, her ratty tail slipping down, covering one breast when she raised her head again. I could swear she looked sad and tormented. I didn't believe it for a second. A former was still the woman who betrayed me with that scumbag lawyer. The same woman who treated me like some old, no longer needed car for a new, wealthier, and more respectable husband. The same woman who coldly shot me in the head and set my trailer on fire, burning my body beyond recognition. Finally, she was the woman who blew her new husband's brains out on the living room carpet when he became a nuisance. Now, I wouldn't buy a single word that came from her faded lips. She spoke softly and rarely when she asked, "What do you want from me, Ray?" I served my time and paid my dad in for. I'll be on parole for the rest of my life. So you have nothing to worry about? Our son. I haven't seen Robbie in these damn 40 years. I don't even know where he is now. Your mother and father made it very clear that they want nothing to do with me. And Robbie will never know what I did. Hell, he probably has already forgotten about my existence. I'll never see him again. You'll either say what you need or get the hell out of here. Another long sip from the bottle and another smile from me. I just wanted you to know that your treacherous betrayal, kicking me out and finally putting a bullet in my head were the best things that ever happened to me. Amazing, isn't it? Seriously, it's the best thing in my entire life. You'll ask why. It's quite simple. If you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't have become rich now. Having more money than I can ever spend, I wouldn't have a wonderful, loving wife who worships the ground I walk on, and I love her more than anything in the world. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have our 3 biological children, and we wouldn't have 5 more foster children. I would not have 7 grandchildren now. The pale skin of Swan began to flush with red patches and a thin vein on her temple, swelled and pulsed as it quietly told her about myself and the life she missed out on. I wouldn't be a member of Cabana, an international nonprofit organization, or the Chamber of Commerce, wouldn't have joined the country club in city council. I wouldn't have built from scratch and sold 2 companies, the combined income of which secures a comfortable and prosperous life for my children and my grandchildren. I wouldn't have traveled around the world and seen the 7 wonders of the world without what you did. I wouldn't have made love to my wife on top of a mountain in Peru, under the most unbelievably starry sky we've ever seen. I wouldn't have achieved any of this thanks to you. I've got everything a man could dream of. That's why I just wanted to come in and thank you for everything. I watched as you stood there, slightly lowering your head and covering her eyes, seemingly reflecting nostalgically on what she had and what could have been. She served a sentence of 38 endless years for crimes she didn't commit. I had 40 years of a wonderful, love-filled life. She struggled at the bottom amidst the most incredible filth, committing the most repulsive, twisted acts just to survive. I, on the other hand, thrived and grew under the sunlight and clear sky. Now in her early 60s, she spent her days in a rundown, smelly bar and lived in a room upstairs. I lived in a beautiful mansion and frequented the country club. Life was so unfair when I thought about it, I couldn't help but laugh. Thanks for rubbing it in, Ray. She spoke in an almost lifeless voice. I've spent every minute of every day regretting my choices, and I've had a whole lot of time to think about it. Now I'm too old and worn out to do anything else but live my crappy life day by day. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'll quietly die in my bed, but I don't think so, because everything in my life has gone sideways, one thing after another. I fell into the cesspool, and I'll probably kick the bucket right there. There's nothing you can say to me that could make it worse. Hell is hell, Ray, so thanks for stopping by, and now get the hell out of here. She turned her face back to the sink and down the remnants of what was in her glass. Well, thanks for the beer, I said, placing the empty bottle on the counter. You can keep the change. I turned and headed for the door. I have a question before you leave. Hoarse voice reached me from behind. Why did you stay alive? Who did I shoot? I stopped in the semi-darkness and turned to look at her one last time. This time I didn't have a smile, but I still answered. It was my friend Mac. He was the guy I sometimes let stay overnight in my trailer. Mac had pneumonia, and he passed away that morning. And you came and did what you intended to do with me. Apparently you assumed that since Mac slept in my bed and was about my height and weight, it was me. As I found out later, he was already dead. By the time you splattered his brains all over the pillow, I returned just at the moment, and you jumped into your car and sped away. I hid in the bushes when the firefighters and the police arrived, and they thought it was me in the trailer that burned to the ground. That night, the real you disappeared, and I became Mac. From then on, Ray was dead, while Mac had a whole new life ahead. However, there was one more thing left for me to do as Ray. From the night you shot your lawyer husband, I was there. You never knew about it, but I was there. I waited until you passed out after your evening binge, and when Mr. Gurker returned home, I put a bullet in his forehead just like you. Cold-bloodedly shot Mac thinking it was me. After that, I placed the gun in your hand and took the contents of a secret safe. You took responsibility for his murder and mine. The money I took from that lawyer gave me the necessary starting capital when I began a new life under a different name. Your life went to hell and I moved to Texas. So Sue and everything I did because of how you treated me, because I loved you. And you pissed on my love and tried to take away my life. You know, as they say in the Bible, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You damn well angered me, and I made sure your life turned into a living hell. Now have I answered your question? Stupid, selfish bitch. The deed was done and the chewed-up back cover of the old book was closed. Exiting the bar, I flipped the worn-out sign to close story to my wife. And I had been together for 20 years before we ended her marriage. We met when we were both in high school. I had just moved into the area and I didn't know anybody in town. She was always very friendly to me, and I immediately took a liking to her. She was sweet, kind, and most importantly, she had the same relationship with God as me. I'd always dreamed of becoming a pastor, so after college we would be options. We eventually decided it wasn't feasible at the time, so we got jobs. After about 5 years, I reached a certain point where I was deeply unhappy with my work, and I needed a change. My wife stood by me while I got an associate's degree in biology. After that, I threw myself into studying everything there was to know about Christianity, and I did everything I needed to become a pastor. We opened our own church, and after a while, our congregation grew. I couldn't have done any of it without the help of my wife. She was my rock through all of it, and I still have so much love for her because of that. Religion has always been important to both of us, and I know a lot of people assume that closed-door activities can be a little bit bland. I will comment briefly on that. It wasn't for us. We were a married couple, and nothing we did behind closed doors that we were both fully consenting to as sinful in any way. That being said, the only thing that had ever been brought up that I didn't think was right was bringing another person into the bedroom. The problem started for us when new family moved into town. We met them when they stopped by the church to ask about baptizing their son. My wife and I wanted to make sure they were happy in the community, so we gave them all the information about the church and told them to come to the following Sunday sermon. We were happy to see them there, and we introduced them to the rest of the people in our town. At the end of it, we invited them over for dinner so we could get to know them a little bit better. They came over later that night, and we had a great time with them. They kept coming back on Sundays to see us. I was happy that we had some new members for the church, and I was also happy to see that they were integrating with the community well. My wife ran a weekly community service group that didn't have very many volunteers. She would have some around major holidays like Christmas or Easter, but throughout the rest of the year, it was normally just her and maybe one or two other people. One day, my wife came home from her community service and happily told me that the new family had joined the group. I was excited by the news. Over the following months, we spent more and more time with them, and they became close friends of ours. We saw them regularly for dinners, and we even hung out with them outside of the church for double dates and things like that. My wife was the only woman that I had ever been with, and as far as I was aware, she had never broken the bonds of our marriage. I had no idea what to look out for as far as cheating went. I know now that she was acting strangely for a while, but at the time, nothing stood out to me. One of the biggest indicators that I missed was how she started volunteering on extra days during the week. The entire time we were in the church, she would always volunteer on Thursdays. Suddenly, she was volunteering on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and the occasional Saturday. I was always very busy maintaining the church and planning sermons, so I wasn't always able to help her with the service. I first noticed that something was off when she was making her announcements on Sunday and mentioned her Thursday community service group. I had been under the assumption that the Tuesday and Saturday groups were the same thing. I didn't understand why she didn't mention the extra days, especially if that might open up the door for other members to volunteer. When I approached the altar to give my sermon, I added an addendum to what she said, telling them about the additional days when the sermon was over. She seemed to be irritated with me. I asked her about what was wrong, and she told me that I undermined her by correcting her in front of everybody and embarrassed her. On top of that, she told me that they weren't doing the Tuesday and Saturday volunteer days that week. I apologized and told her that I never meant to embarrass her. However, when I went to my office, I saw that on our shared calendar, she had Tuesday marked off for volunteering. Her story wasn't quite adding up to me. I started to think that there was something off, though I didn't know what exactly it could have been. Infidelity never crossed my mind. Part of me assumed she had some kind of guilty pleasure that she was participating in that she didn't want me to know about. I didn't like that she was keeping something a secret from me. But we had been married for so long, and we knew everything about each other, that I felt she might have been entitled to have something to herself. I found out the truth of the matter when I decided to join her in a community service group. It was the week before Easter Sunday, so I already knew my sermon like the back of my hand. She had that Tuesday blocked off on her calendar for volunteering, so I decided that I would join her in the spare time that I had when I went to join her in the recreation room of the church. Nobody was there. I texted her and asked her about where they were because I plan on joining them. But I never got a response that was unlike her, so I was immediately worried about her. I thought that she might have gone home, so I made my way there and saw that her car was in the driveway. Instantly, I was relieved. I figured that nobody showed up to volunteer with her, so she must have canceled it. I walked inside and heard some very strange noises coming from the basement. We had a partially finished basement with one room that was being remodeled into a guest bedroom for my mother to come and live with us. With the thumping noises, I thought that she might have been down there assembling some furniture or doing some work now that she was free. I put my things down and went downstairs to help her. Instead of discovering her in the middle of rebuilding the basement, I saw her having relations with the new couple, both of them. I was in full shock. It was the last thing I ever expected to see my wife in the middle of. They saw me and instantly stopped what they were doing. My wife approached me, trying to explain what was occurring, but I was so shaken by everything that I could hardly hear what she was saying. I walked upstairs and entered my bedroom, locking the door behind me. It was a lot to comprehend. I believe she was the love of my life. I trusted her more than anybody else in the world, and I gave everything I had to her. In turn, she betrayed the pledge of our marriage. She was hammering on the door and attempting to get in because she believed I was harming myself when I was really simply sitting on the bed. Eventually, she had the man from the couple break down the door. I was virtually catatonic. I never got irritated. I've always been really calm and composed, but seeing them all, they're staring at me like they were concerned about me. I was shivering with wrath. I yelled at all three of them and told them to leave once I had recovered myself. I contacted a divorce attorney and claimed that I witnessed my wife cheating on me. Unfortunately, they recognized my identities and knew my wife. I wanted to keep things private, but I didn't think it would be possible. My wife urged me to forgive her and give her another chance, claiming that it was the godly thing to do. That was not something I was capable of doing. I told her that we were done and that I was going to divorce her, so she should hire her own counsel. Easter Sunday was especially challenging since we wanted to appear as normal as possible, given how important the event was to everyone in attendance. It was tough to grin while around her. The following Sunday, My wife did not make the usual opening announcements after the music. I could notice several puzzled expressions in the congregation. I didn't want to break the news to them, but I wanted them to hear it from me rather than everyone else in town. I said that my wife and I were divorcing because of infidelity. The remainder of the sermon was dedicated to my wife and the couple she was having an affair with. It was about infidelity and how wrong it was to violate a sacred marriage pledge. In retrospect, it may have been a touch bitter, but it was where my heart was at the moment. I divorced my wife. The attorney I worked with was fantastic, and they made sure I was well taken care of. I didn't make much money as a pastor, so they made sure I didn't have to pay any spousal support to my wife. I was able to keep the house and relocate my mother a few weeks after the divorce was official, but my wife was nearly considered as a pariah in town. I have contradictory emotions about this because she injured me, yet part of me believes she deserves it, but another portion does not believe that anyone should keep hatred in their hearts. The couple with whom she was having an affair has been banished from the majority of the town as a result of their actions. Rumors spread, and I don't believe they were able to clear things up. Now I'm focusing on my church and reconstructing my life without my wife. It's strange how many women in the congregation have approached me and asked what they might do for me. Some of them are widows, divorcees, or single ladies. I can tell they're interested in me in some ways, but I'm not sure if I'm ready for another relationship yet. LP, you sound like a very kind person, and you certainly did not deserve to have this happen to you. Nobody does. It's a shame you'd end a 20-year relationship for whatever reason. I understand how you could feel conflicted about how the rest of the town treats your wife. I cannot imagine how complicated that must be. Of course, you have to balance those emotions while also maintaining a particular manner for the rest of your church's members. Moving on will be difficult after everything you've been through, but I hope you'll eventually be open to the idea of finding love with another woman, especially if some of those women are people you already know and trust and who share your beliefs. Story 3. My girlfriend and I have been dating for approximately 8 months. It wasn't the longest relationship I've known, but it was really toxic. On New Year's Eve, she and I met in a New York nightclub. She was by far the most attractive female in the room, and from what I could gather, she didn't have a date. I noticed a group of men approaching her and firing their weapons, and I decided I had nothing to lose by giving it a shot myself. I approached her and told her a couple of jokes, to which she responded positively. I ended up buying her a drink, and we had our first kiss at midnight. The first few months of our relationship were really passionate. There was something about her that I found nearly alluring. She was like a narcotic to me, and I couldn't stop spending time with her. After our honeymoon period was gone, she became very cold with me. She appeared to be attempting to distance herself from the connection, which I strongly opposed. I asked her over for supper one night and gave her the opportunity to speak up. I told her how much I liked her, and that I didn't know what was wrong with our relationship, but I wanted to work on it. She was open and vulnerable with me, which I appreciated. She informed me that at times in her relationship she would become quite scared and withdraw from them rather than risk having her heart broken. I informed her that she was my dream girl and I had no intention of messing her. Following the conversation, things improved for us over the next 6 months. We repeated the pattern 3 or 4 times. It was quite exhausting, but we got through it each time. At the time, I saw that shaky relationship and believed that we only got through those difficult times because we had such a close tie. I realize now that it was completely unhealthy, and we should have simply terminated things after the first time. We had another low point in the months preceding our breakup. I was quite weary by how things were going. I'd never been with someone who was constantly hot and cold, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. It seemed like every time I tried to detach myself from the relationship, she would intervene and do all in our ability to keep me there. For context, my girlfriend was an aspiring influencer. If you're not sure what that means, it means she was essentially unemployed. However, she had a few brand deals that helped her pay the rent. Whenever we went out, I would pay for food, concert tickets, and other expenses. I was also raised with the expectation that the band would always pay for the dates. But that's another story. We're at a bad time in our relationship, and she made it apparent to me that she wanted us to move in together. I couldn't understand why she wanted to move in with me when we were ready to break up. She told me that she thought living together would help us work through some of the challenges we were having, which made no sense to me. So I told her I didn't want to move in with her until we had a stronger foundation than we did. She was unhappy about it and stormed away from me, and I hadn't spoken to her in approximately 4 days. It was getting to the point where I assumed she was just ghosting me. It sucked to think about it, but there was a role. A part of me felt relieved that it was finished. She eventually contacted me and expressed a desire to meet with me to discuss things. I was totally prepared for a split when she arrived at my residence. Instead, she was honest with me and informed me that she couldn't afford to pay her rent due to a landlord-imposed increase. She didn't want to have to move back home with her parents, so she chose to live with me. I was nervous at first. I didn't want her to live with me just because she expected me to pay her bills. I explained everything to her, and we agreed that she would just stay with me until she was on her feet. There was no legal binding, and we had the option of kicking her out if something happened to us. Any breakups? I was relieved that I decided not to officially move in with her just a few weeks after that. Things really hit the fan for us. She has been working hard to increase her Instagram and TikTok followers. The more followers she had, the more brand deals she secured and the more money she made. She was following a lot of people, messaging a lot of other people with significant followings, and posting stuff practically continuously. It worked for her too. She was gaining a significant number of followers and was quickly ascending the ranks. She had a couple of additional brand options coming in, and she was enthusiastic about all of the possibilities. One day I took a half day off from work because I had a conference to attend the next morning. I was at home, relaxing on the couch and playing some games when she walked in. She was wearing a men's t-shirt that I knew wasn't mine, and I'd never seen her in it before. When I asked her about it, she explained that it was just an old clothing that she had something about. It didn't look right to me. Of course, I wasn't familiar with her full wardrobe, but she wasn't the kind to wander about in an old baggy t-shirt with a couple of holes in the bottom. If she had informed me she had borrowed a friend's t-shirt, I would not have questioned, but I knew she was lying when she said it was her t-shirt. I didn't utilize social media much. I found it tiresome, and the majority of the individuals that used it all the time, including my fiancé, were really zealous. But after seeing that, I decided to investigate into it to see what was going on. Drew eventually started tagging images on Instagram. I noticed she was with another man who was wearing the same t-shirt she had worn when she stepped in. Why would she come into my apartment wearing the identical t-shirt that another man had worn the day before? I had my doubts that she was sleeping with someone else. I checked the other guy's social media and noticed that he had a lot of followers. Not millions, but a good number. He became semi-famous through his appearance on a dating show. I put two and two together and I assumed they were having an affair. I merely needed some assurance that this was the case. I believed if there was any evidence, it would be in her Instagram messages. She walked into the shower, and I immediately browsed through her laptop to see what I could uncover. Of course, she had already logged into Instagram, so I didn't have to do anything. I discovered her communications with the guy from the dating show, which I thought were highly flirtatious. She messaged him first, saying she'd like to hang out with him if they ever visited New York. He reacted to the message, and they were quite sexual with one another before to it. Whenever she posted a picture of herself, he would respond with emojis and other such messages. Their most recent communications had suggested meeting up for cocktails at his hotel bar. He had traveled into the city for a picture shoot and wanted to see her. The fact that it happened at his hotel bar told me all I needed to know. There was no doubt in my mind that they had sex together. I grabbed a few of screen captures of the messages and forwarded them to myself as quickly as possible while she was still in the shower. I took short to put dates in the photos to substantiate everything from the looks of it. It appeared that the guy had a relationship with someone I assumed was a fellow cast member. Now, I was aware that it could have been for PR purposes. I don't follow reality TV, but if they ended up together, I'm sure many viewers of the show would enjoy seeing them together afterwards. My girlfriend came out of the shower to find me in my bedroom, packing her possessions. She inquired as to what I was doing, and I informed her that I was well versed in all aspects of the situation and that she should leave my flat. I wasn't going to let a cheater crash with me. She tried to yell at me for invading her privacy, but I didn't mind. She was a liar, and that's all that matters. When she saw I was not going to budge, she packed her bags and left. Her only other friend in the region was engaged, and from what I understood, she did not want her to stay in her apartment because she lived there with her fiancé. I couldn't blame her for feeling anxious about it. I kicked out my girlfriend. I was thinking about everything for a few days, trying to figure out what I could do. I decided to call her out on social media. She was using me, lying to me before cheating on me with someone who could help her advance in the industry. I generated an Instagram post and shared it on my story. I contacted the woman on the dating program who appeared to be in a relationship with the other guy and sent her everything. I commented on videos and posts in an attempt to gain traction for it. It eventually took off and rumors began to spread. People were calling my partner a homewrecker and other derogatory terms on Instagram. Much worse than that. I felt horrible that she was being verbally assaulted, but it wasn't my problem. When my girlfriend discovered that I had released that video, she was furious with me. She told me she didn't think I'd ever do something like that to her, and she stated she never wanted to speak with me again, as if that was her choice to begin with. The couple from the dating program split up, and the woman went on a couple of podcasts to discuss everything. I did not listen to them, but I did have some people share the information with me. People on the internet despised the guy after everything, claiming that he was already a jerk on the show. I'm now a year and a half removed from that situation and ready to move on. I'm a little more skeptical of the people I'm getting into relationships with right now. I can't help but feel that she wasn't looking for the proper reasons. Your connection appears quite phony to me, at least from her perspective. It appears that she likes you since you take her on dates and she believes you can provide for her, so she was willing to be with you because of this. I'm not surprised she was reaching out to folks with a large following to try to connect with them. She was undoubtedly doing that for the cloud. In some ways it worked, but perhaps not in the way she had anticipated. I'm sure the brand bargains she had will make her think twice before she takes advantage of them. Thank you for taking the time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed the article, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a tale to share with me regarding your own or someone else's circumstance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.